To Indigenous women's organizations, you have carried this work for generations, often with courage that is not the story on the evening news.
Ahead of the upcoming federal budget, the Carney government has announced millions of new dollars for equality and reducing violence for women and gender-diverse people.
We need the federal government to end its impact assessment in the Ring of Fire, which are only duplicating the amazing work of our First Nations partners and slowing down getting shovels in the ground.
A First Nation in Ontario has signed an agreement with the province to speed up construction for a road to the mineral-rich Ring of Fire.
Have to dig deep, throw those punches anyways, get that air in my lungs.
And defending her title, we check in with Ojibwe boxer Mary Spencer before her big fight on Thursday in Montreal. Tanse, good evening. I'm Chris Sanachkate. Welcome to APTN National News. With the unveiling of the 2025 federal budget less than a week away, the Carney government has announced more than $660 million in new funding on Tuesday to promote equality and reduce violence against women and gender-diverse Canadians. Minister of Finance François-Philippe Champagne made the announcement at a press conference at the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa. The funding will be distributed over 5 years and will begin in the 2026-2027 fiscal year. It includes $223.4 million to support organizations to reduce violence against Indigenous women and other underserved populations. Another $382.5 million will go towards improving the economic security of women and girls, and $54.6 million is targeted for gender-diverse communities. Indigenous Services Minister Mandy Gold-Masti praised the work of Indigenous women's advocacy groups.
We are investing in safety and equality. It is because the economy is only as strong as the people it includes and protects. To Indigenous women's organizations, you have carried this work for generations, often with courage that is not the story on the evening news. You are not unseen, you are not unheard, because we know that we continue to see Indigenous people in spaces in Canada.
Webequie First Nation and the province of Ontario have signed an agreement today, both calling it historic and say it will unlock economic development and speed up the construction of a road into the mineral-rich Ring of Fire. The largest portion of the funding would go towards the Webequie Supply Road, which would connect the First Nation to the mining development. Ontario Premier Doug Ford called that road a game changer and says shovels could be in the ground as early as next summer. The Community Partnership Agreement signed on Wednesday provides Webequie First Nation with $39.5 million. The funding includes $1.5 million for mental health supports, $10.5 million for supplies and materials for the Webequie Supply Road, upgrades to the airport, and the First Nations Community Multi-Purpose Center. $3 million would help Webequie lead a process for the technical study of the East-West Road corridor. Premier Doug Ford says the Ring of Fire contains the largest deposit of critical minerals in the entire world. He says the project would add $22 billion to Canada's economy and create 70,000 new jobs.
Now, there's one thing standing in our way: federal duplication. We need the federal government to end its impact assessment in the Ring of Fire, which are only duplicating the amazing work of our First Nations partners and slowing down getting shovels in the ground, building the roads to the Ring of Fire. The good news is we're making tremendous progress with the federal government toward an agreement that achieves one project, one review, one decision. Prime Minister Carney made a commitment to us to get out of the way of nation-building projects. To his credit, he's putting action behind his words.
Some First Nations in the Ring of Fire area were also quick to criticize Ford's comments. North Spirit Lake First Nation said in a statement, the one project, one process policy threatens to silence Indigenous voices. It weakens environmental protections and violates constitutional and international obligations to Indigenous peoples. Question period in Manitoba's legislature got heated earlier this week when a member of the opposition interrupted Premier Wab Kinew. MLA Jeff Wharton made crying sounds and gestures while Kinew was saying some oppressed groups in Canada had to fight for the right to vote. Here's APTN Sav Jonesa with more.
Say that they were only doing their job.
Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew was caught off guard during question period Tuesday after a Conservative MLA showed a, quote, complete lack of respect, unquote, towards groups of people once being denied the right to vote.
And you know what is different about people on this side of the House? The entitlement isn't there because we had to fight for what we have. It was never given to people on this side of the House. In living memory, people couldn't vote. We just heard. I want the permanent record of this assembly to show that when I was talking about the fact that my father was not allowed to vote in this country, the member for Red River North said in a sarcastic voice, wah, wah.
Gross. Kinew was speaking on new legislation his government proposed to protect vulnerable groups from getting their, quote, rights trampled on by future governments when invoking the Notwithstanding Clause. The Notwithstanding Clause allows a government to make a law that overrides certain parts of the Charter of Rights for up to 5 years. Kinew worries that future governments may use the clause to advance agendas with anti-2S LGBTQ rhetoric or that target religious minorities. MLA for Red River North Jeff Wharton is the man who mocked disenfranchisement, which impacted Indigenous people, women, and many other minorities for decades after Canada formed.
During the Premier's comments and answers to a question that he didn't answer, he had mentioned that I was making sounds towards his father not being able to vote. I disagree with that comment. And I
Order, please.
I would ask the Premier at his earliest convenience to table those comments and answer.
Deputy Premier Uzoma Asagwara said along with the comment, Wharton also made crying gestures twice. Asagwara argued that the Premier has a responsibility to ensure Wharton's behavior is reflected in the House's permanent record.
I do want to reinforce and reiterate what's happened here today. The member for Red River North rose on a point of order to double down on making comments and gestures that degraded and minimized the recent, in living memory, history of Indigenous people being denied the right to vote in our country. And that is shameful.
It is very dehumanizing.
Cody Grote is an assistant professor of history and Indigenous studies at Western University. He says disenfranchisement was the denial of the right to engage and push back against the Canadian political system.
Inuit gained the right to vote in 1950, and again, status Indians not until 1960. There was this heated back and forth, and almost always the question was, were Indigenous peoples mature enough and were we civilized enough to be able to express our opinions and vote in the Canadian electoral system?
He says the right to vote is not something to take lightly.
I think if we don't openly denounce this comment and this rhetoric, then we're saying it is okay to laugh at the fact that Indigenous peoples, in recent memory, in the Premier's parents' generation and my grandparents' generation, didn't have the right to vote.
APTN News reached out to the Progressive Conservatives for comment, but did not hear back before airtime. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A medical housing facility has just found a new home thanks to a partnership by the Prince Albert Grand Council and Hatchet Lake Denisovan Nation. The facility isn't new to the city of Prince Albert, but a hotel closure provided an opportunity to expand services. The Spruce Lodge boarding home will provide Northern First Nation members with accommodations, meals, and transportation to healthcare appointments. The original Spruce Lodge facility opened 40 years ago in a different location, offering only 10 rooms. This week, the Prince Albert Grand Council opened a new location at the former site of the Days Inn on Marquis Drive with 65 rooms, a commercial kitchen, a lounge, and a 22-seat boardroom. The Prince Albert Grand Council and Hatchet Lake says the facility shows their commitment to keeping northern residents safe when traveling for important medical care. The BC Assembly of First Nations AGM was recently held on the West Coast. We'll bring you an update from that gathering when we come back. Welcome back to Vancouver now, where APTN's Tina House had a chance to talk with APTN National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak, who addressed the chiefs at the BC Assembly of First Nations. Tina?
Thank you. We are so honored to be joined by National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak. Cindy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And welcome to BC.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Now, you just addressed the Assembly for the BC Chiefs. Can you give us a summary of what you mentioned to the Chiefs this morning in your speech?
Oh, absolutely. Look, we talked about justice issues. I had visited a penitentiary, and it was really, really difficult to be there, and I kind of explained my experience on that. And it was hard to see so many First Nations people in the justice system and behind bars, and to know that those were once just our kids growing up in our communities. So what more can we do? And I commend the leadership around the table for being here and for trying to find solutions to better the lives of First Nations people in this province and across the country and in their communities. But I also commended them for their work on the justice, their justice report, their justice blueprint that, I think many First Nations right across the country will begin to follow with the work that's done right here in BC. And so we talked about that, and we talked about policing. Sometimes there's over-policing towards First Nations off reserve, but yet on reserve there's under-policing. And we need a new strategy and a new First Nations policing system in place for our people to make sure that the gaps are filled and that we're not left out anymore.
Do you have a message for those that are behind bars, that are waiting for that justice and possibly has been served injustice in their case?
It was really tough to see that, and I think also, we want to make hope, right, for their kids. If sometimes let's focus on our children, and if we can try and fix some of the systems that happen towards our little ones, our children and our grandchildren, we're going to make a better life for all of us. We're going to be up against bail systems. I commend Regional Chief TG for pushing back. I know last week that he had made a strong presentation in the House of Commons, as well as the Assembly of First Nations, on the bail reform that they're trying to push forward. But they have to remember that we have a voice too, and Parliament needs to open up their eyes and their ears when they're talking about justice issues to make sure that the voices of First Nations are at those tables as well.
Absolutely. And speaking of the voices, we still are dealing with a number of crisis issues in this country. We've got the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls issue, the murdered and missing men, and the opioid crisis. What is the AFN doing to advance those causes and to get some solutions there?
Well, we did do, we are calling for a national inquiry, of course, and, and pushing for, an emergency on opioid and the drug crisis. And look, our every community is dealing with it from coast to coast to coast. And it was so prevalent that First Nations were united in their discussions on that. And look, we got to make sure that we're pushing Canada as a whole to no longer, poverty isn't an option anymore. First Nations have always been left in poverty, left to the back to bricklay jobs, or not that there's anything wrong with that, but at the same time, that's always where Canada wants us. And we have to keep pushing to make sure that we're pushing for more of a voice in this country, and to make sure that if they're going to start talking about big national projects, that First Nations are at those tables as owners and as wealth generators, rather than pushing them aside and saying, we'll give you a little bit here, but leave us alone. Gone are those days. And I hope that the sooner this country realizes that, the better. And I think any smart company would be engaging with First Nations sooner and earlier, as soon as it's a thought that you're talking to the First Nations on the ground, wherever that may be.
And on a personal note, what's it like for you as a woman, as the national chief of the AFN, and what's it been like in your leadership role, if you can share a bit with us?
It's, I'm thankful that I'd seen the I'm glad that I've worked for previous national chiefs like Sean Atleo, Perry Bellegarde, Phil Fontaine, and other chiefs across the country, Derek Deepanek, others, and I'm glad that I didn't mean to be in this role, and I was born, my dad was a counselor and then a chief, and I was always a chief's daughter, and that was really difficult growing up. And at the same time, it's, you're focused, you have to be focused, and you have to think of others before yourself, because it is duty, right? And you need prayer, you need God to help you, you need Creator to help you guide your days, because it could be very, very busy. So I feel for the next national chief already, and I'm praying for them, that they're getting ready in their life, whomever that may be. But I look forward to the years ahead and trying my best to help First Nations every day. I can't fix everything, but what I can fix, I will, and I'll try my best to do so. That's all I can do, and that's all I can commit. So thank you.
We thank you for joining us today, and congratulations on all the work you've done so far in your leadership. Thank you. Back to you in studio.
Ojibwe boxer Mary Spencer is up next to talk about her important fight tomorrow night. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Time now for our photo of the day. It's National Cat Day just south of our border. So to celebrate, here's Mojo enjoying a suncatcher filling the room with the colors of the rainbow. Thanks to our Alicia Dawn in News Graphics for sharing that cute photo of her Mojo with us. If you have a picture you would like to share, it's super easy. All you have to do is send us your photos to share@aptn.ca. Time now for a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. On the East Coast, St. John, sunny and 10, Charlottetown, 11 and partly cloudy. Nuujooak 4, the Grand River 2. St. Jovite, showers in 6, Montreal, rain in 6. Rain in Ottawa at 6, Peterborough 8. Timmins 2 and cloudy, Thunder Bay, partly cloudy and 7. Churchill 2, Thompson 2. 7 in Winnipeg, Dauphin 5. Regina 3, rain in Estevan at 5. Stony Rapids 2, La Ronge 1. Cloudy in Peace River at 2, Fort McMurray 3. Sunny in Medicine Hat at 12, Calgary 9. 12 in Vancouver, Bella Coola 6. Fort Nelson 6, Smithers partly cloudy and 3. 2 in Watson Lake, Beaver Creek -4. 1 in Watee, -1 in Wrigley and sunny there. Sax Harbor -7, Colville Lake -2. -1 in Chesterfield and showers, Baker Lake sunny and -5. And Arctic Bay -11, Iqaluit -1. Just last year, Indigenous professional boxer Mary Spencer became the World Boxing Association's super welterweight champion. She retained her title back in April and is making her second defense of her WBA title tomorrow night in Montreal against American boxer Michaela Mayer. This time around, the fight is a historic one. APTN News caught up with Spencer at her weigh-in on Wednesday. She weighed 152.8 pounds, less than 2 pounds shy of the 154 limit for her weight class. Her opponent is Michaela Mayer, who is looking to conquer a third weight class and become a 3-division world champion. The World Boxing Council and World Boxing Organization junior middleweight titles are both up for grabs. Spencer is a member of the Chippewas of Nuwash Unceded First Nation in Southern Ontario. She is the first Indigenous female in history to compete in Olympic boxing before turning pro. Spencer is aware she's the underdog and that the fight won't be an easy one.
I read that yesterday, that it would be a historic moment, but it's not something I want to focus on. I want to focus on the fight itself, and like I said, I'm going to have to dig deep for this fight. So I won't think about the belts too much. I will think about what is going to motivate me when I get to that point where it's hard, where maybe I have a broken nose like last time, and a broken hand like last time, and I have to dig deep, throw those punches anyways, get that air in my lung. Like, there's other things that are more important that I need to prepare for mentally, so I'll try and focus on those things.
Good luck, Mary. We're all rooting for you. And finally, for us, with Halloween almost here, horror movies have been everywhere this month. But a new book argues that the real fear factor in many films isn't the monsters, it's the colonial stereotypes hiding beneath the blood and jump scares. Bloodied Bodies, Bloodied Landscapes, Settler Colonialism in Horror is a new book by Carleton University's Laura Hall. The Mohawk scholar is a lifelong horror fan, and we spoke with her earlier. Laura Hall, thanks so much for joining us to talk about your book, Bloodied Bodies, Bloody Landscapes. You argue that horror films, more than any other genre, offer a glimpse into the brutality of settler colonial violence. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. I do think two things. I think that horror as a genre has sort of taken up that project of this notion of savagery, or the civilized heroes taking on essentially symbolic Indigenous people. I also think that horror at times tries to unsettle the settler family, the homestead, the frontier. It just tends to, at least mainstream horror, tends to revert back to that reinforcement.
Pet Sematary with its Mi'kmaq burial ground and Poltergeist always comes to mind, but what are some of the films that are among the less obvious offenders?
Sure. The one I keep coming back to is The Descent, because that movie is the reason I started writing the book. And in The Descent, there are creatures who are cannibalistic, humanoid, creatures who live in a cave in the Cherokee homelands. And so the fact that that movie was made in the earlier 2000s, but and then got a sequel, I found really fascinating. And certainly Pet Sematary and Poltergeist 2 come to mind as well.
I definitely remember The Descent and remember watching it in theaters. In recent years, there's been a lot of successful Indigenous-led horror movies. The late Jeff Barnaby's Rhymes for Young Ghouls and Blood Quantum. There's Seeds, Night Raiders, Slashback, films that have taken on colonialism. As a horror movie fan, what do you make of these films?
I love Slashback. Slashback gave me a lot of hope. I also have been adding, The Moth, Michel de Rossier's movie, and Falls Around Her. As a thriller, I think that those movies give us a really good sense that this is a moment for horror. It's a moment for Indigenous horror, but it's not just a moment. It's a project that could go on, and a project that could be expansive, even in terms of reasserting our cultural understandings of time, of different parallel realms, and so on.
And Laura, finally, can you explain how can mainstream Hollywood filmmakers do better in all of this?
Well, the main thing I've been saying is that resourcing is the issue. More resources for Indigenous filmmaking, more resources for Indigenous actors, directors, writers. That would be my main directive.
Laura Hall, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And that's your evening newscast for this Wednesday. We're back again for your daytime and evening newscasts tomorrow. Please join us then. From all of us at APTN National News, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next day.